Good morning from here.
Good morning from here. It's already afternoon and getting dark. It's winter. So can I start?
You're ready to go.
Okay, great. First, I understand Spanish and Portuguese and can speak all three languages, the lingua franca of the event. So you can ask me questions in the language you're most comfortable with. I will be speaking English because it's I guess the lingua franca, and that's it. Jorge, unfortunately, my slides are also in English. So if there's anything that you don't understand, you want me to repeat, you can ask questions at the end. So thank you very much for the invitation to the event, Azucena and Jorge. It's a great pleasure. Also a pleasure to have friends in the audience and new friends, which I wish I could have sat with you and cheer on this amazing day for both Uruguay and Brazil. So today is a special day, and I'm very happy to share with you aspects of my research. So what I will be doing today is not so much presenting. I don't have a grant or any grants, actually. I don't have a research lab. I'm right now very independent, even though I'm permanently employed in my university, which is Södertörn University in Stockholm, Sweden. So I will be speaking from the perspective of a cultural critic. And I will be presenting to you today parts of an article that I have submitted for a special issue on propaganda for the Nordic Media Journal. It's still in peer review, so I have no idea if it's accepted or not, but I think that it was a very good example to share. So I won't be, as I said, talking about a whole field of study or a research department or research directions. I will actually go to the micro level and talk to you about one case study of an advertising campaign by the Swedish mining lobby. And I think a lot of the aspects that I will cover resonate with many of the topics that we have been talking about, but I'll present this as a case study. So let me share my slides. So also in the program, you very kindly named me as an artist. Yes, I am an artist, but I'm also supposed to be a media scholar. So you'll be hearing my perspective as both a person who is supposedly a media expert of sorts, but also, I guess, my big interest in research, if I could draw a big line, is the politics of images. And I research a lot about media activism, and I write a lot about things that particularly happen in Brazil concerning gender issues, mostly also anti-racist campaigns or trans groups and all that. So this paper is a bit different for me because I'm talking about social, environmental justice, and in a case study that's in Sweden. So I'm going to take you away from South America for a little while and bring you to the Arctic briefly. So this is the very long title of my presentation. What would Swedish mines be without a party? Lobbying, sovereignty, and climate propaganda in the advertising campaign, The Swedish Mine. So exactly 1 year ago, precisely 1 year ago, I was going home from, I play maracatu, which is a Brazilian beat. We had just recorded in the studio session. I'm going home and I find this billboard on the subway station. Now, I don't know if I have time to ask you a question right now. What do you see? Anyone can give me a guess? Participants? So, okay, I can go on. So I looked at this, I'm like, okay, wow, this looks like a fashion advertisement. And then I go nearer and it's not a fashion advertisement. It's an advertisement for the Swedish mine. And what is the Swedish mine? And they have a text, they have a website. I'll go through the text in a little bit. And they have a website. I opened the website and it was quite interesting, surprising, and also a bit shocking. You know, what do Black women partying have to do with the Swedish mining lobby organization? So this got me quite a bit confused and got, for me at least, quite negative reactions. It obviously looks like a case of total appropriation, tokenism, you got it, you name it, right? So this is an advertising campaign. The client is a Swedish mining cluster, which is a lobby organization for the Swedish mining industry. Their objective was to create an awareness campaign about the importance of metals and minerals in everyday life. These billboards were placed in the central parts of the three largest Swedish cities, Stockholm, Gothenburg, and Malmö. And the channels were mostly billboards, but also digital signage across town, social media, and a website, which I will show to you soon. I did call, in the website, there was a telephone number for the communications officer of the Swedish mining lobby, whom I called, and I sort of interviewed her for an hour. And I asked her about the budget. It was undisclosed, but by the level of the campaign, I assumed that 2 million crowns would be very cheap. So this is a massive investment from the Swedish mining lobby. And she told me that the primary target audience would be women 30 to 44 years old living in urban areas. Very interesting. So this picture that I took, then I realized that the target audience was actually sitting in front of it. And why this target audience? Yes, because this is, according to them, the group in society that is the most ambivalent about mining. Now, the word ambivalent for me echoes very negatively as well, because this is the term used by Cambridge Analytica to convince ambivalent voters to go over to Trump, right? So this term is very problematic. Also, then I went to do some research, and reports show that women 18 to 35 living in metropolitan areas in Sweden have declared that they suffer from climate anxiety, which is a psychological condition which is treated in therapy in Sweden. And there's even an organization called Climate Psychologists that treats precisely climate anxiety in people. So but the relationship that I want to talk about most is like the gaze, right? What happens when we look at these images? How do we act? Do we just confront them as, oh, just one more commercial? Or do we have a kind of a responsibility in acting against this kind of propaganda? So I mentioned earlier that this article is part of a propaganda issue. So I do a very classic visual and textual analysis of the materials before me. So this is the text. What would a party be without metals and minerals? Whether on a regular day or a party, we need metals and minerals, and they are a critical part in the transformation for a sustainable society, for example, electric cars. Besides, more of our needs can be met here in Sweden, where we are building the world's most climate-smart mining industry. A very brief textual analysis, I pick up the words that for me reverberate the most, right? We need metals, the transformation, sustainable electric cars. I'll get back to the cars later. More of our needs can be met here in Sweden, where we are building the world's most climate-smart mining industry. So now we wonder, what do for partying Black women unaware of our gaze, right, have to do with the world's most climate-smart mining industry? Granted, this is probably not the most creative or best, very well executed, but not a very good advertising campaign. But, bad advertising gives us a lot to think about. Sorry, my child just got home. Okay, so what do I mean by propaganda? So I went around and, tried to find, there's Noam Chomsky who talks about propaganda and manufacturing consent. But I find that Jonas Staal, who is a Dutch artist and theorist, has a very, very convincing, for me at least, article about different climate propagandas, where he outlines all the way from the most conservative extreme, from the eco-fascists to the conspiracists, libertarians, liberal climate propaganda, all the way to the more transformative climate propaganda. So I use this sort of as a blueprint to position if this campaign is a part of propaganda, or if it is just, according to Marshall Souls, persuasion as a rhetorical performance that involves playful, creative, and even devious communication, right? So there's a difference between propaganda and misinformation, but the boundaries are extremely blurred, I find, especially when you get to environmental communication, which for me is not even environmental. It's purely about politics. So why would the Swedish mining lobby put millions of crowns into an advertising campaign for the general public? Well, the first context for this is that there has been a demand for more corporate accountability by fossil industry, for example, mining, in order to increase brand strength. Now, we know that iron, the price of iron or metals doesn't depend on like retail, right? You're not selling it directly to people. These prices are commodity prices. It's a whole other market. So why do they do this? Well, one very convincing example in tying to Clementino's presentation yesterday, and that's why I bring BHP here, is that after the disasters in Brazil in 2015, BHP obviously had, their image was completely problematic, right, to say the least. So they had to re-engineer their brand in order to sound, you know, like they're doing their thing in terms of sustainability. So they came up with this campaign called Think Big, right? And I don't know, I've been sort of very interested in going to all these mining companies and looking at their type of communication. And it's very interesting as examples of, yeah, this kind of sort of ideological, well, all advertising is ideological, but it's interesting to see how mining companies are trying to look sustainable, right? So think big, and then you see their website and the choice of imagery that they, you know, they try to make more women. It's a very male-dominated industry, so they always try to put more women, happy, you know, miners, and these images of the open pits, right? Then you go into their website, and they also have, you know, a young woman and very hopeful. They obviously, all of them are advertising electric cars because that's the next big thing, right? It's not about collective transportation. It's still about the car, right? And why BHP? Because BHP is the Brazilian branch is called Samarco, which is the one responsible for the, you know, the climate catastrophes, which you saw images through Clementino's work yesterday, right? So I don't need to emphasize the level of disaster. Now, if you look at this image on the website, you see that the big print is about promoting their logistics, and this very small print, they say after the stoppage, right? Not disaster, caused by the Fundão Dam failure in 2015. Now they're announcing they're at 26% of their capacity. So the font size here really, really matters. Going forward on this page, you have, you know, the website for Fundação Renova, which is the foundation created to do the reparations for people. And lo and behold, the image that they put, you know, they have a video with only with their employees. None of the affected are speaking. So total advertising, you know, no voice given to the victims at all. And this is the image that they put, which is about the houses that Clementine was talking about yesterday, that are not like the houses they had before, without a backyard where they can plant and continue with the economy. And interesting enough, entrepreneurs of Bento Rodrigues, not citizens, entrepreneurs. So going back to Jonas Stahl's climate propaganda, this is a totally corporate liberal climate propaganda that is promoted here. If you go to Vale's website, they say we make sustainable mining, and all the imageries of, you know, seeds and nature and all that. But we know that these interesting industries, even though they try to be sustainable, they are not. They are extremely dirty industries, right? And covered with genocide, because wherever there is a mine, there's indigenous people who suffer, and so on and so forth. I think we all know about this, right? But it's interesting to see how this is sort of, this discourse happens, right? There's also a context in Sweden, not just the international concept of mining companies in general, but in Sweden specifically, the lobbies for forestry, for mining, and other lobbies of very non-environmental friendly industries are making massive campaigns, also with the same point of trying to, you know, make them look good in the public eye. So here you also see the discourse of innovation, alternatives to oil and plastic, that means wood, and again, the car, right? And they have just gotten the Swedish Greenwash Prize 2022 by Friends of the Earth. So that's, you know, very satisfying in a sense. Sorry, I'm very partisan here. The second contest is the mediatization of climate protests. So in Sweden specifically, last year, December, when I saw this campaign, there was a big struggle, a mobilization of local activists in the north of Sweden. And the north of Sweden is where the Sami indigenous population live. They are reindeer herders, and they're very much spread out in this very vast territory. And I've been participating in Facebook groups, sort of like following this discourse. And there was a decision to be made by the government about the opening of a new mine in Sapmi, which is the name of Laponia, as you know, the name that we use mostly abroad. But the whole region of the Sami is called Sapmi. So very political tensions. And of course, Greta Thunberg, our, you know, revolutionary climate activist from Sweden, went up there to join forces with the Sami indigenous activists to try to give this even more media visibility. So the more media visibility the activists get, the more the sector needs to do something about it, right? Needs to counteract. So that it's from the sector's perspective, they also feel like they'd have to do a counter visuality to the protests, whereas the protesters are actually the ones doing counter visuality. So these discourses are very, very inflamed, very political. And of course, climate activists in Brazil are, you know, very, very endangered. But in Sweden, this has become quite a violent struggle, as it's sort of like a cultural war, right, at all levels. Anyway, not nearly as violent as in Brazil, but for Swedish terms, it gets quite heated up. So what do they want? Land rights, of course, political determination against the necropolitics of extraction, to pick up a term that Clementino has also used. It's interesting that just last week, Greta Thunberg joins, and 600 young people have sued the Swedish state for their inaction in climate issues. And just to get you an idea where we are talking about, this is Sapmi in the north of Sweden. I didn't mean to erase Latin America here. I just didn't have space in my slide, so don't worry. I'm not ignoring the global south at all. I am from the global south. I am Brazilian. And this is sort of how the main media talks about this, right? This is like Sami villages against mining companies. Who has the right to the land in Kallak? Kallak is the Swedish name for this new mine that they want to open. And not only is a new mine to be opened, but it is to be prospected by a foreign company. So here, lots of issues of sovereignty come up, which is one of the aspects of my article. Now, the name of the use Kallak is problematic because this is the name of the place in Swedish, whereas the Sami name is Galok. So just the use of the right word is already, you know, an area of dispute. So, and then, you know, if you go to the Twitter flow, this is how the situation is now. This is our, you know, business and energy minister and the newly elected conservative government, which has very strong ties, or let's say totally allied with an extreme right party with Nazi roots. And this is Ebba Busch. She's the business energy minister of the Christian Democratic Party, taking care of everything related to mining. And this is Maria Soner, who is the CEO of the Swedish mining cluster, basically the client that we're talking about. So these two very happy Swedish blonde hegemonic women with their hearts saying, we also love mines, are the ones that are commissioning this kind of thing. Sorry, one second. Sorry again. So why does this Swedish business executive representative of the lobby commission images like this, right? So the third context is that there has been a growing demand in Swedish advertising for more diversity, right? And that means including, from an intersectional perspective, more people of color, more people with disabilities, et cetera, et cetera. But for me, this is not necessarily an inclusion. This is an appropriation would be a light word. And it's interesting that this image, if you notice, remember the images before, we had those elements that were placed on different parts of the image, such as in this one, right? So they placed the elements to show that there's metals everywhere. This is another image of the campaign of a happy family, enjoying time together. This is a third image. It's actually a mixed race lesbian couple called the engagement ring, and you see the element gold right on top of their hands. This is sort of celebrating union, while looking out into nature. This other image is a man with clear Middle Eastern background, eating a hot dog and very happy next to his electric car. And this is the other image of the campaign where, sort of a generational take where grandfather and grandson are playing together in the backyard, and so on. So this is the type of imagery that is, that is sort of meant to appeal to women, middle-aged or women 30 to 44 years old. That means somehow me, in a sense, to make me less ambivalent about mining. So when we talk about tokenism, this is something very important in intersectional discourses and critiques of mass media and representation, that it's only for face value. There's nothing to do with actually giving these subjects any kind of agency, right? This is the website. And when we get to the website, now it's changed. But when we get to the website, this is another image that we're confronted with. So this is a professional situation, architects looking at a model. And I'm just translating the text that this is how the rhetorics look like, right? So very friendly text, probably some very, prize award-winning copy editor was trying to know, how do we communicate mining to the general public? The tonality is very friendly, very also addressing the audience, making everything very sugary, very accessible. But when we scroll down the website, we find again this very commonplace imagery of, industry and things like that, right? The website, curiously, seems to have not been made by the advertising agency. It was actually made by the communications team themselves. And they have a section which is called questions and answers. Now, if you look quickly to all these items, questions are supposed to end with a question mark. All the items here end up with a question mark, except for one, which is indigenous people and mineral extraction. Here, there's no question mark, because had it had a question mark, we would kind of go into, okay, what is the relationship? So this is the only one that's written as an affirmation. If you go to the text of this Q&A, they talk, it's very, very dry, businesslike. It's not trying to convince you. It's like the tonality changes dramatically. And then what they do is they point the user to their position document, where, the document is not very long, but we don't have time to go into the details of the document. But I just find interesting the use of words when it comes to that. They said the position doc clarifies that the industry is always interested in dialogue, right? So if you need to clarify something, it means that A, either it's not clear, or B, you really don't want to do it, right? But you have to say it, yeah? And then they say something that sounds almost like out of a mindfulness manual: mutual knowledge and understanding, right, of both mining and reindeer husbandry will be necessary in order for a fair, positive, and respectful dialogue, again, to be possible. Now, for those of you who don't understand what reindeer husbandry means, it's a very weird English formulation to say that the Sami's main economic activity, traditional activity, is reindeer herding. And reindeer, they take up a lot of space because they need to graze and they migrate and they have to eat certain things that are in the natural environment. And of course, when a mine is built, that it interrupts the flow of reindeer. So, and in Sweden, reindeer husbandry is one economic activity, and mining is another. So here you have an economic conflict that, are set against each other, but they are not symmetrical. So this is the ongoing struggle of the indigenous people for their land rights, their cultural rights, right? And the mining industry is, very, progress above all in industrial development, because Sweden is rich. Why? Because of mineral extraction. So Sweden is not unlike Brazil or Australia or any mineral-rich country that has very powerful mining companies. So we can here draw a parallel that the problems that we have here are the same problems that we have in Chile, that we have in Brazil, but maybe in Sweden in a lower scale. But it's I would say that the problems are identical, right? If we just do a little word cloud about that one section that I showed, these are the words that come in more. So nowhere here, interesting also, the Sami are never mentioned by name. They only say indigenous people. So there's an erasure of the Sami identity, the Sami culture, the Sami rights, and all this. And all of this has made me think about the issue of sovereignty. And now I'm a little bit going away from the study of visual culture and analysis of these things and going to more political science, maybe, where I think that this whole campaign shows a conflict between a lot of types of sovereignty. First, national sovereignty. Sweden, is the most climate smart mining industry in the world, right? So the Swedish have the solution for everyone, yeah? The corporate sovereignty, of course, because in order to prospect, to get minerals out of the ground, you need companies that have the technical apparatus to do that. So, of course, the corporate sovereignty and national sovereignty go together. But in this website, they make sure that they're poking the government to change legislation to make it easier for them. Of course, they're a lobby organization. What else would they do? But what's at stake here is the issue of mineral sovereignty, right? Because of the electrification, transition, and all that, then Sweden and probably every other country wants to make sure they remain autonomous in mineral extraction, which they say so to not depend on non-democratic countries elsewhere. So their argument is that if we mine rare earth metals, et cetera, in Sweden, then we don't contribute to dictatorships elsewhere. But if the government insists on making it difficult for us, then we have to, unfortunately, use bad means to get it. So that's very problematic. And against that, you have the popular sovereignty. And what do the people want, right? Including the Sami, and of course, a campaign like this is about, they want me as a citizen to vote for those that support more mining, right? So what is the popular will here? And in this book, Potential History and Learning Imperialism, Ariela Zulay talks about world sovereignty, which means, not just people, not just corporations or institutions or nation states, but world meaning, nature, right? That encompasses a whole other perspective. And one example of that would be the buen vivir, for example. So I think that all of these discourses, for me at least, become very apparent when I look at this type of campaign. But not everything is lost. So there are many activist groups in Sápmi, and one of them used a media tactical response to debunk the Swedish mine website by creating the Swedish mine myth website. So what they did is they designed the website exactly the same. It wasn't too difficult because the design was quite simple. And they changed, by using the same form, they changed all the contents, but in a different discourse, which I called the planetary turn, the il giro planetario. So using a very well-known tactic of détournement, which means changing the content or changing the form, but looking similar, this is the text that they created, right? So they say resources are necessary for people to live their lives. We get resources from agricultural products, minerals, metals, and water. So not only minerals and metals, right? The whole ecosystem. We need those to lead our modern lives. This they agree. But they call for a kind of sustainable living that builds on international solidarity. Very interesting. And then, they poke, but did you know that the mining industry, mining companies in Sweden are doing campaigns and putting pressure to change legislation and make it worse? Here you can read more about the Swedish mine myth. So in this website, they proceed with well-grounded arguments to every bit of content that this campaign puts forward. And this is the group that did this. So, you can donate to them if you want. So this gives me a lot of hope that, the continuing to push these companies and sort of, taking their masks off in order to, fight for more climate justice, right, and indigenous rights. Unfortunately, the Swedish lobby is very insistent, and of course they have lots of money. So this year in May was the Stockholm Plus 50 conference. And lo and behold, what do? Right on the week where they launched this conference, they launched this new part of the campaign, which is about an electric car entirely made, they say, from Swedish mines, right? And this is the other part of the campaign. They say no mines, no electric cars. So just to conclude, and I don't know if I went over time or not, but there's a sliding scale between marketing, advertising, PR, lobbying, and propaganda, which are going to continue to reconfigure these climate narratives, right? And they will be affecting politics, both positively and negatively. Yes.
So I'm sorry for interrupting you.
Yeah.
We can hear you, but we cannot understand it.
You
Give us a second.
You cannot hear me?
We can hear you well, but it is us, I think,
Oh,
lost something. Technologically, way behind my right here.
when can you hear me now? Can you hear me, or is my connection bad?
Because a couple of seconds there, trying to figure out when.
Okay, where did you lose me? Here? Hold on.
But only the last 30 seconds or so, we have not been able to see you, but we have been hearing you well.
You cannot see or you cannot hear?
We told you and we have seen you all the time except for the last 30 minutes. We lost seconds. Last 30 seconds, we lost the image. We're trying to fix it.
Oh,
But it was just the last 30 seconds.
okay. Where should I pick up again?
Stockholm Plus 50. But wait a minute. Not yet. Wait a minute until I see if they can fix the image again. Sorry.
Okay, so you have lost how much time of? Okay, well,
Just a second.
Isabel. Isabel?
what should I do?
Isabel, can you hear me?
Yes.
How much you have left in your presentation?
Yeah,
Like
I'm
in terms
done.
of slide,
I'm pretty much done.
okay, you are back up. We have you online now. Video and sound.
Can you hear me, or can you see me?
Yes, can you? Both.
Both.
So you can continue now.
Okay. Okay, so where did you lose me? Here? Can you see my slide?
Well, Stockholm Plus 50.
Ah, Stockholm Plus 50. Okay, yeah. So what I was saying is that this campaign was launched very opportunistically during the Stockholm Plus 50, where all the delegates going to the conference would see these billboards. So of course, from an advertising perspective, it was a golden opportunity to promote the newest invention of the Swedish mining cluster, right? But the visuals are completely different than the previous ones, where they don't make any claims about representation, multiculturality, or everyday life. This is, an open pit with a car and two women, I suppose, wearing futuristic clothes, right? So they're making a claim about the future that they see. So this is also very interesting, how all these companies appropriate an idea of future, which they think is the imaginary that everybody shares, right? So it creates a lot of disputes in the public sphere, but which, in a sense, these campaigns depoliticize the issues, right? They make it very appealing with good design and great photography, and then we are left to wonder. Anyhow, this is, I'm finishing now. There's a blurry line between marketing, advertising, public relations, lobbying, and propaganda, and these will continue to be negotiated and even more blurry. So media has a very important role, as well as activists, in making sure that these companies don't abuse the public sphere, right? So to what extent these companies or mining lobbies or lobbies in general are willing to sort of push forward a social engineering idea to get this license to operate. So I'm going to skip these conclusions and just going back to research, right? I think that this kind of approach is important in the field of eco-media literacy, which is about, working with media in order to, what kind of discourses are put forward in this according to the communication itself, but also the waste generated, as Flora was saying yesterday, from digital consumption and the whole internet complex, the clouds and, the Jeff Bezos and, Elon Musk's and all these people. So I think there's a contribution here. And I was wondering if any of you in your research clusters are working with eco-media literacy in any way. So that's it. This is for the book circle. This is a few of my inspirations. That's it.
Thank you, Isabel, for this presentation. And I saw that I saw about that before I moved to the States now, and I was also like very curious about how this advertisement can be about and what struck me most when I saw the advertisement was the connection between women on domestic spaces with energy, which seems to be a new connection that this art is deploying, and it gives a whole new level of thought about how we use appliances in our homes and it calls for the need of fossil fuels in our homes. It was very, very shocking. The advertisements are put in a very gigantic, very big. So my question is about how does this play out in this new landscape of energy saving, where the minister is talking about technological neutrality, that opening the floor to every type of energy production, as long as it's the needs of energy in Sweden. Are there these types of advertisements also being produced by other types of energy producing corporations or companies, or is it a typical mining corporation?
I have to apologize. I couldn't hear I try to make out, but I think there's something with the sound that we can't hear very well. Maybe the batteries of the microphone are, yeah, we couldn't hear at all. I'm sorry, I didn't want to interrupt either. No, it's very jumpy.
Very jumpy.
Yeah, can you hear? And I'm so sad because it seemed like a great and long question.
So maybe we have a question on the stone. Maybe that connection will work better.
Yeah, there's something we can't really hear. It's very choppy.
Can we let Pedro come in and maybe this connection is better?
Or maybe you guys can write the questions in the chat.
Pedro,
Still very much.
buenos días.
Say again. Speak again. This is the hybrid condition.
Hi,
Yes, I can.
Jorge.
Pedro, buenos días.
Jorge.
¿Cómo soy?
Jorge. Okay. Thank you, Isabel. Glad to know you. It was an excellent presentation. I enjoyed it enormously. And the big issue is really when we look at the cases of San Marco and Brumadinho, basically with Valle do Rio Doce. I made the presentation of a book recently by a professor from USP, Adrián Lavalle, from the School of Political Science. So I read 20 articles of the book talking about the experience of the researchers, no? But sorry, 1 second, a siren is passing here through my apartment. But basically what I wanted to say is that your presentation shows really the schizophrenia of this process. And definitely when we look at the cases of San Marco with Renova, but also at the case of Brumadinho, what we see is that the process of indemnization, which is the most relevant, has been so slowed down, and Renova has changed leaderships and all this kind of thing. And now we hear very little about it. But definitely what I think is important in the Brazilian case and in the state of Minas Gerais is the mining dependence, no? The logic of mining dependence that makes this whole process so complicated to make a shift, an effective shift within the state, no? But coming back directly to the issues that you present, and obviously it's very, very difficult to make a comparison between Sweden and Brazil, notwithstanding that now we're more optimistic about following more the rules with the new government, but still there is an enormous strength of the mining industry because it's one of the main businesses, no? The main export commodities of Brazil, no? But definitely there is one thing that is important is the control on garimpo, no? Which is illegal mining in indigenous areas. But what I wanted to stress with you, or to ask you to think a little bit, what are the possible trends that you see that so-called sustainable mining could be an agenda that really has to be built by every country, no? But definitely there is a contradiction. How to make sustainability in mining, say in African countries, we depend so much on the electronics, on the illegal mining or the legal mining in authoritarian regimes, no? So you were bringing up some issues, and I obviously don't want to take too much time, but definitely the big issue is mining possible to make it sustainable? Some people say yes. I haven't seen really how that works, no? In the case of Minas Gerais, there is a direct mining duct of 500 kilometers between the mining of Vale do Rio Doce, Anglo-American, and the harbor of Rio de Janeiro. So it's 500 kilometers of a duct, no? Instead of water, it's mining outcomes. And this brings also up very complicated issues, because how sustainable is that a mining duct, for example, thinking about the risk that can take place during the whole trajectory, for example, no? So I think your discussion is very relevant. It is an alert. I've been working also on environmental justice issues, and we see that the issues of environmental justice have been slowed down when it comes to mining, unfortunately, and only when disasters take place, no? Because Brazil is mainly a case of ex ante or post, no? And we see that ex ante prevention is very little, and then when the disaster takes place, we are really very affected. So if you can talk a little bit about thinking about how, in the case of Sweden, some kind of agenda, considering that now it's a conservative government, is bringing up the discussion of sustainability. Because at the end, when you're looking at marketing and all that, they try to show it's sustainable, but definitely it's not.
Yeah, I mean, of course, I mean, by definition, it's not a sustainable industry, right? So the question is how to do less harm, right? So, but I really don't have the solution for mining itself, because I am no way not an engineer of any kind. I'm only a cultural critic. So what I can observe is what are the discourses going around. So in Sweden, particularly, there's a very, very strong connection of the mining industry to welfare, right? Sweden's social democracy is based on welfare. Welfare costs a lot of money, and the money to fund welfare historically, for at least for the past 100 years, have depended in large part of mining and the export of iron. 10% of Europe's iron is produced in Sweden, right? So there is many discourses that go around, right? The conservative discourse is that more mining is good because mining is good for everyone. It doesn't matter. And then, of course, this website particularly, what they actually want to do, they want to promote their fossil-free innovations, right? And they also talk a lot about circular economy, because that's what the European Green Deal talks about, right? Recycling, et cetera, et cetera. So, of course, I would say in Sweden, there is it's an engineering country. It's a country that basically defines itself through what it calls innovation. And of course, this is a business opportunity, right? Climate transition is a business opportunity, and all the countries want to participate in this. So what is the next economical frontier? Sustainability, right? But from the Swedish mining lobby's perspective, sustainability is about optimizing the mining itself, right? Making the mining itself sustainable. And then the government picks it up and saying that it's also social sustainable. By what? By promising more jobs, right? But as, for example, mines get more automated, there's more AI and this and that, there aren't that many jobs, right? And then the question is, who takes those jobs? Is it the people living? Is it the Sami? Some of them obviously work in the mining industry, but there's a conflict right there, right? Also, there's a matter of revenue. The ore is extracted in the Arctic, right, in those areas, and then they say that it's good because the tax money comes back to the region, it develops the region. So there's a developmentist kind of discourse. The problem is that skilled laborers come from outside, and the tax money is spread over the whole country. So those parts So the argument is that those parts of the country don't get that investment directly. Yeah, there's some jobs and all that, but it's export. So the commodities, the money goes to the whole state, right? But this is the argument, right, of sustainability. So we have to ask, what kind of sustainability are we talking about? Are we talking about industrial sustainability? Okay, fossil-free steel, great, right? But what about the social sustainability? And they say more jobs. Okay, social sustainability, that's okay. And then you talk about the sustainability of the whole ecosystem. This is where the most disagreements come with, because nature doesn't have an owner, right? Right? People are owned by the state, right? The corporations sort of have regulations, but nature itself, like we said yesterday, nature doesn't think or has a voice, not the way that humans have a voice, right? So this is the big dispute. So the indigenous populations, as we also have discussed endlessly in this conference, and will continue, there is a specific knowledge, a cosmovision, a respect, a way of life. That is modernizing narrative, because we, like Latour says, we are still modern. So we need this terrestrial turn, right? The politique terrestre. But to which, how that will be embedded in politics is a whole other story. But the good news is, in terms of indigenous rights, that the Sami have their own parliament in Sweden. So this is and of course the indigenous people in the world are not just separated, in remote areas. They're also getting organized, right? There's activists, but there's, even Ailton Krenak, the Brazilian indigenous philosopher, sort of advocates for this diplomatic route, right? And he also names the Sami parliament as one example in which governance can be effected. So I say that, of course, this mining dependence is always going to be there. It's the history of the world. It's going to be there. So the sustainability, I think it goes through governance. And I honestly think it's a matter of sovereignty. Who owns what? Who has right to what? But what I find super problematic in terms of communication is that mining is already about expropriation, extractivism, expropriation. Why do they need to do advertising expropriating racialized bodies again? Why? Right? Why? What goes through their mind? So Laura Mulvey, the male gaze. I mean, we have Bell Hooks oppositional gaze. We've everybody who's gone to a visual culture course in a university has learned about these things. Why do we keep reproducing what Ariela Azoulay calls this imperial gaze, right? So I think it's a matter of imperialism in a sense, right? Mineral sovereignty, right? Who has the most geopower? And this has always been the question of colonialism, right? And now in its contemporary forms. And this is something that's part of these colonialities. So, and even in Sweden, everybody thinks Sweden is a social democracy, everything is modern utopic. Regarding the Sami and mining, it's very colonial, but they don't want to see it this way, right? Because they're too civilized to be colonial. But if you look, this would be a whole other lecture, there are genocidal aspects of the mining industry in Sweden, but also, the indigenous in Sweden, they're white, they look white, right? It's another ethnicity, but they sort of can assimilate into the mainstream in a way that maybe, Afro-Brazilians, again, if you look at the white majority, Brazilians, it's another kind of assimilation, right? So these assimilation policies, culturally speaking, are extremely problematic. But I think that the climate activists, they had to keep on going because they are pushing for not only reparations, but more, regulations that are more, they're trying to also to slow down growth. I think what Flor said about degrowth is very important. There's this imaginary of total acceleration. And just one last comment. When we talk about mining, we cannot forget that data is also mining. So the north of Sweden, which is cold, right, is great for data servers, right? And it also takes resources. So we have the extraction economy, not only of, hard metals, we also have our digital lives, right? That are working in those territories And because of climate change, it's a very fragile territory in the Arctic, extremely fragile ecosystem. So it's a very vulnerable area. So this fragile ecosystem, it's not only the global south, we have to also stop saying global south and global north. What does that mean? Either it's north or south of the globe, right? So let's talk about planetary constellations, right? It's the planetary boundaries we have to talk about. Otherwise, we will be stuck in this globalization discourse. And this globalization discourse is passé. Sorry, that's it.
Thank you very much. On the issue of global north, I disagree a little bit, but we'll have it in another moment.
Yes, thank you, Pedro. Muito prazer.
Prazer.
Sorry for the long.
Isabel, can you hear us here on the floor, on the room?
Can we hear you? Yes.
Can you hear us? Can you hear us?
Yes. If you speak slowly into the mic, absolutely.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, just speak slowly.
Okay. We are running out of time,
I know.
and we are going to take one more question from the floor. One comment from the floor. Briefly, because we have to move on, and Paula has been generously waiting for us for a while.
Yes.
It's coming next.
So please, the person who asked me that long question, please send it.
Isabel,
Yeah, I'll be happy to answer. Yes. Clementino.
Isabel, Clementino aqui, falaria em português. É importante o comentário do Pedro.
Fala devagar.
Me interessa muito. Consegue me ouvir?
Fala devagar.
Sim. Importa para mim a questão da publicidade. Eu não vejo como tanta diferença da publicidade, até porque, se pensarmos como movimento negro, o que é da publicidade no Brasil, temos algumas questões que também dialogam com o trabalho, com a relação de trabalho que é que move o poder nas cidades que dependem da mineração. E uma das grandes lutas do movimento negro no Brasil é pela visibilidade com os espaços publicitários. Então, uma campanha como a que é feita naquela BHP e tantas outras na Suécia seriam muito bem-vindas para uma parte da população do Brasil que não se vê nas campanhas publicitárias ocupando espaços de arquitetura, como pessoas da moda, do lazer, e, ao mesmo tempo, é como acontece nas cidades que dependem da mineração, onde grande parte dos populares são a favor, mesmo com o desastre, das mineradeiras, e lembra um pouco a situação de Katrina, aquela campanha do Not in My Backyard, lembra? Então, esse é o contexto que acaba se citado, e a publicidade representa tanto isso. Você trouxe uma mesma imagem que eu uso na tese, de drone, mostrando o novo bairro, a nova cidade de Bento Rodrigues. Por cima, eles usam o apagamento para não mostrar a situação nas áreas que foram abandonadas, como eu mostro no filme.
Uhum.
I was before 15 years. Então, mais ou menos essa situação. É um conflito entre o apagamento, onde você quer, mostra a humanidade que está desamparada pelo crime da mineração, e quando você volta por uma forma de justificar o uso da mineração. Isso é esse comentário. Muito obrigado pela apresentação.
Obrigada, Clementino. And
But
I have
only a few
thank you
minutes.
so much.
Sorry.
Please,
We only have a few minutes. It's an hour, we can only stay until 4 o'clock per time. So please go ahead and respond to Clementina I'll be
Just
aware
like-
of it tonight.
Just a closing comment, because Clementino and I have a long dialogue already about this, right? So I think that I couldn't hear everything, but I think I got the part of the comment that the notion of representation is very important. It's key to for this whole process of reparations, but in a kind of, if we talk about justice, I think it's something called visual justice as well, right? I think this is sort of what I think, Clementino, this is what you're talking about. And the notion of representation is and the history of photography, right? I mean, there's so much to do this, and I think that we should work together and continue these discourses, because I find that this kind of article that I write is not necessarily to give depth to theory, but I think it's to use it as a denuncia, right? To denounce the harm caused by this kind of visual injustice, right? So I don't know if it's an adequate response. It's just a thought that I had while you spoke. But I hope to be able to talk with everyone at length about this.
Thank you very much. We wish you were here.
Yes? What did you say?
They wish you were here, there.
Yes, I wish I was there too. The thing is, I'm going to Rio Grande do Sul in 10 days. So it was unfortunate that the dates didn't coincide. Ana Paula, please, I'm sorry. Thank you everyone for listening. And if you want a copy of my
Thank
article,
you.
I'm happy to share.